Now, just on that, we're going to have an opportunity now in the next few minutes or so to kick off a webinar, a panel discussion on what young people can do in the current moment and how definitely young entrepreneurs can lead on the continent. We know we're a very young continent, and by 2050 should have one of the world's largest working age populations, and that presents an opportunity for entrepreneurs. But I think if we don't use that opportunity, it also presents, as many people have suggested, a ticking time bomb and a massive challenge for many nations on our continent. And that's the conversation we're going to be picking up with the 7 entrepreneurs from across our continent, taking a look at some of the big work, of course, they are also doing in many of their areas of influence and where they are also engaged in commerce. Now, allow me at this point to introduce for our panel the Young Africa That We Want, some of my guests this morning. And Afetsi Awono is the founder and CEO of JB Williams. He's all the way from the West African nation of Ghana. Also going to be joined by Elizabeth Okulo, who's the co-founder and CEO of La Famia Gardens from Kenya. Jeanette Umutoniwase is going to be joining us as well. She is from Inzira Dreams Network in Rwanda, where she is the founder. Mahmoud Johnson joins us from Liberia, where he is the founder and CEO of J-Palm. And Nicole Yembra is going to be joining us from Nigeria, where she's the founder of Crystallis Capital, a tech startup platform. And we're also going to be joined by Simba Muriro from Zimbabwe, where he is the founder and MD of Oxygen Africa. And also going to be joined by Uyimbabazi Paciente, Youth Project Manager at Terimbere Farm Limited, all the way out in Rwanda. Now, they're going to be joining us for our conversation, taking a look at how young leaders in the world of enterprise and commerce can be able to lead and navigate the current moment that we find ourselves in. So we're going to start our panel now, and I'd like to welcome Afetsi, Simba, Elizabeth, and Nicole onto our call, and we'll certainly also get an opportunity to be joined by Mahmoud and Uyimbabazi in the next while. But just to kick us off, I would like, I guess, Nicole, if you can start us off. I'll give all of my panelists just shy of a minute to introduce themselves and to tell us where they're from, some of the work that they're doing, and the massive social impact of their operations throughout the course of the continent. Nicole, I'll start off with you, and we'll make our way to Simba.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Nicole Yembra. I'm the founder and managing director of Crystallis Company. So what we've really focused on is having 2 sides of our business, giving early stage capital to technology companies that are truly solving a lot of our Pan-African problems. But a large part of that is also in the advisory side of our business to really help companies go from founder-centric to institutions, because we really do believe that institutions are needed to really drive the continent forward. So being part of this conference, being part of the shared value group is helping these same institutions realize they can be both highly impactful, but also very commercially viable. So a huge part of our work is in helping them understand that and using that as a scale from one stage to another. So happy to be here, based in Nigeria, but definitely doing work across Africa.
Perfect. Elizabeth?
Thank you very much. My name is Elizabeth Okulo. I come from Kenya. I'm the co-founder and CEO of La Famia Greens. La Famia Greens is a social venture that is using hydroponic and greenhouse technology to produce vegetables such as tomatoes. I am also the beneficiary of KCB to Jajiri program, where I was sponsored to study agribusiness management and hydroponic technology, as well as I am a former young leader at LX, which was founded by Fred Swenika. And currently I am taking part in Africa Yes Fellowship for Social Entrepreneurs. And at the same time, I will be expecting to take part in Mandela Washington Fellowship from 2021. So I'm looking forward to engaging with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Elizabeth. Afetsi, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Afetsi Awono from Ghana, CEO of JBW Limited, defense and energy tech firm supporting oil and gas activities and defense activities across Africa.
Okay, thank you for that, Fetsi. Simba?
Ghana.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Sorry for that, Fetsi. I think I cut you off there. I thought you were.
Continue,
had that.
Fetsi. Continue.
Continue.
It's all right. I think the introduction is fine.
Okay, all right, cool. Simba?
Hi, my name is Simba Muriro. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm director of Oxygen Energy Private Limited, a renewable energy company specializing in commercial and industrial rooftop solar solutions. I am also heading up renewable energy at Rio Zim Limited, which took over the assets of Rio Tinto, where we're developing renewable, hydro, and incidentally a thermal project to ensure that there is base load for Zimbabwe power grid. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Simba. Jeanette, I see you've just joined us. Good morning to you and welcome. We're doing introductions, so if you can briefly introduce yourself, you have about a minute or so.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeanette Mutanuwase. I'm the founder of Insta Dreams Network. We make and sell bags. It's like African handmaids. I'm also a graduate from KCB, Ijire program here in Rwanda. So I'm glad to be a part of these panelists, sharing my ideas with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jeanette. And I want to maybe start off. Thank you very much for those introductions. And we're certainly hoping that Mahmoud can join us in the next few minutes or so. We're still faced with some connectivity challenges there. Mahmoud Johnson from Liberia, who's going to join us shortly. But Jeanette and Elizabeth, I want to start off with you. I think, the pair of you are doing some interesting work, not only just with, other young people and in the social entrepreneurship space. And my big question now, as Mahmoud just joins us, and maybe before I get to that question, let's allow Mahmoud to just briefly introduce himself, and then I'll continue with my question for Elizabeth and Jeanette. Mahmoud, welcome to you,
Hi,
and
everyone.
thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Mahmoud Johnson. I'm the founder of JPalm Liberia. JPalm works with smallholder farmers. We provide access to machines that enable them to increase their productivity for oil palm production. And then we take the previously wasted oil seeds and use it to produce oils that we now use to create skincare products and hair care products such as soaps and lotions and body oils. And I'm very excited to be here today to share my own views about how we can create the Africa that we all want.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mahmoud, for joining us. Really glad to have you on the line. And Jeanette and Elizabeth, let me come back to you and the question that I was posing. In your considered view, what role do you think the entrepreneurship and the commercial impulse of young people can play in the recovery and reconstruction efforts that no doubt have to be underway in response to COVID-19? From where you're sitting, what role do you think youth entrepreneurship can play in really spurring on and catalyzing the economic recovery of our continent? Jeanette, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. Young leader and entrepreneur here in Africa should be at the forefront of initiating difference in different impact in their community. For example, by starting some small businesses that can play a big role in Africa, where the youth can change their mindset, starting by using local available resources. So that can be a big role of youth here in Africa to reshape African economy.
And Elizabeth, I guess in the work that you, in the space that you work in, and you did indicate that you're a beneficiary of the KCB Foundation's Tujiajiri program, and I have to get that right. And I certainly hope my Swahili will improve by the next time all of us catch up. But just talk to me briefly about, in your view, what role you think youth entrepreneurship, in particular in agriculture and linked, I guess, to questions of sustainability and food security, what role young entrepreneurs in those spaces can play in our reconstruction and recovery efforts?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so currently do we all know that around 265 million Africans are food insecure? And if you've heard about that, it should raise an alarm. And for me, what I believe mostly right now that we can do as young people in this particular continent is to invest in agriculture, because agriculture is one of the driver of the economies of most of the African countries. And as young people who happen to be the bulk of this population, and being that we are the youngest continent in the whole world, it is to drive this particular sector into the next level. So currently what we are doing through the help of KCB Foundation, we are using hydroponic technology. That one is soilless farming technology to produce vegetables such as tomatoes and other indigenous vegetables. This means that now as a young entrepreneur, what we really need to do is to adopt different technologies and take advantage of the innovations, and also at the same time make good use of the locally available resources to invest in the agricultural sector. We don't lack anything at all. We have everything that we need to do. So what we can do is we can look for different opportunities where we can plug in and also at the same time advance in ourselves. And also another thing is young people have this negative attitude to agriculture. So in most cases, when you tell young people you should come into the agricultural sector, and they're like, no, agriculture is dirty. Unlikely, they don't know how much we have great potential in creating so many job opportunities in the agricultural sector. And all it takes is to venture into agribusinesses and have the notion of distinguishing between farming and or other agricultural activity, and now concentrating in it as business.
Sure. Thank you so much for those remarks, Jeanette and Elizabeth. And I think a big issue that I certainly, or a big takeaway I take from that is this idea of how do we change our attitudes and mindsets, especially as it relates to agriculture. And I certainly hope that attitude or that perception that agriculture is a dirty set of activities and something that all of us shouldn't be aspiring to as young people is something that's slowly changing on our continent. And I certainly hope that the bulk of young people who are on this call are certainly receptive to that idea and call to a mindset and attitude shift. We're going to now take a look at our second poll question. And as I said, we're using these polls and Slido as a conduit for our interaction with yourselves for our question and answer sessions, but also as an opportunity to really get a sense of who is on the call and also to give our panelists an opportunity to understand who is on the other side. And we continue with that, now trying to understand our audience a bit better. And we're asking you, are you a young person who is male or female, starting a business or still in ideas phase? Or are you from a multinational? Are you from a public sector organization, an industry body maybe? Or from an NGO? And we'll certainly give you an opportunity and the next minute or so to respond to that. And we'll see some of the results coming through in the next minute or so. To just give us a sense of who is in the room. This is our a panel on entrepreneurship and the young entrepreneurs shaping the continent's future, and getting some insights from young people from Nigeria, Liberia, Rwanda, and many other places on our continent, Zimbabwe as well, and makes for fascinating reading. Also have one of our panelists from Ghana as well. Interesting that about a third, seeing the numbers shift there somewhat, about a third from non-governmental organizations, and just shy of a fifth from female entrepreneurs with an idea, and a little beneath that, male business owners who are running an established business, and also have those coming from public sector organizations. And let's keep that poll going there, and probably got about 16 responses or so. And I certainly know that we can do a lot better than that. So got about 18 responses now. Let's try and target 30 responses, and then we can quickly reflect on what that tells us about who is on the line. So we've got about 22 responses now, and 25, so 5 shy of our immediate target, and I'm sure we can do a lot better than 30. 26 now, 27. We're on Slido.com, and if you just joined us, having an opportunity now to take a sense at who is part of our audience, where they come from, and where they are in their journey in the world of enterprise. We've got about 32 responses now, and quite clear that the majority of participants on this webinar and call and who are tuning in to this panel are from public sector organizations. Seems like it's shifting slightly, but a fifth of them from public sector organizations. And we'll certainly come back to the implications that might have for our discussions this morning. And I want to bring in Nicole at this point, and she's the MD of Chrysalis Capital. It's a $15 million Africa Tech Fund. And I guess, Nicole, the big question I have for you is with many of the conversations that we had earlier, really punting the role. I think, Elizabeth was speaking to the role of using the latest cutting edge technology to improve yields and to really ensure that we have food security on our continent. You interact with the technology ecosystem here on the continent and abroad as well. What message, if any, would you have for young entrepreneurs who are making a foray into the world of tech, who are watching us now, but seemingly have challenge in accessing markets for their innovations and also accessing the funding that's needed to really scale their operations and make them worthwhile?
So for me, the big thing is that people are like, oh, I have this idea, but I don't have the money to solve it. I think instead of us viewing money as the answer to our problems, money is just simply a tool. A lot of times people are not actually solving a real problem, or they haven't thought through all the ways to use that capital efficiently, and they just feel, give me a ton of money and it'll make everything better. There's the Ubers and the WeWorks of the world to show you that that's not true. Like, these are companies that have never been profitable a day in their lives, but they've had billions of dollars poured in. So if you're not building a sustainable business model, if you're not solving a real problem, no amount of money is really going to save you. All it's going to do is delay the inevitable. So when you're coming in and say, I have this amazing idea, I think a lot of people don't do research. So sometimes they'll come to me and say, oh, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, oh, have you heard of this company? Or have you heard of that company? And they're like, no, I haven't. And I'm like, this is just me, one investor. I already know 2 or 3 people doing something similar. You have to be able to tell me why you're different, why I should be able to bet on you. So having a thorough understanding of the problem, having a thorough understanding of all the different solutions and which one you're actually focused on, and then convince me why you are the people to solve it. Because you may have the right idea, but if you're the wrong entrepreneur, my money is going to be burnt anyway. How do you then show that you are also the right person for me to back, right? That will be able to make that problem, that we actually solve that problem. Do you have the right networks? Do you have the right attitude? So that way we're not going through, burning through capital. Africa has such little funding, 0.1% of total venture capital funding. So we have to be smart about where we're kind of allocating a lot of that money to, right? So that's kind of a big thing for me. Yeah.
Nicole, I want us, just before we let you go there, to speak about markets. I think you've covered the funding aspects, and I think many entrepreneurs, even who might be, I guess, self-funding through their own revenues or through their own contribution, some of their innovations, might battle, I guess, from getting the necessary scale and accessing parts of the market or acquiring a share of the market that allows them to really test their innovation, iterate, and continuously improve it. What are some of the things you've learned that you would like to share with some of the entrepreneurs on the continent?
Yeah, so I think it's important to break your business and its growth strategy into different phases. And in the funding world for tech, there's kind of already these phases are predetermined for you. So pre-seed stage is kind of, I'm still trying to test this out, doing my proof of concept. So I don't really have anything. So this is where stage, you just believe in me, right? And so you believe in me, we're going to test this out, have a smaller group of people. Yeah. Your seed stage funding is then saying, okay, I want to try to prove that I have product market fit, right? So from that stage is, do I have people that are willing to spend money on my product? How quickly am I learning? How quickly am I innovating, working through that? Once I've proven that this is viable and there's this market that wants it, even if it's within a small town, right? So we've seen a lot of the bike hailing startups, they just prove it within Lagos or within, Ibadan, like a small area to say that this actually works. And then you now get ready, okay, our Series A stage, let's expand this. And expansion doesn't always have to be international. Like if you're in a country like Nigeria, we are 1/5 of the continent. Yeah. Like you almost don't need to leave Nigeria.
There's a market big enough. There's a market big enough.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you're thinking about all of those things. So what is that particular sector? Elizabeth talked about agriculture. Everybody has to eat. So if you're macro like that, you're like, oh, wow, this is a whole lot more people versus, oh, I want to use AI in like automatic cars. Sure. Your market is a lot smaller, right, at that stage. So truly understanding, what that potential scale could be. Is your product, priced at $1 a month, which can make it more affordable? Or is it at $100 a month, which the average person, people that are living below poverty line do not meet? Okay. So spending the time to break down your business, your market, who it's reaching, right? And just realize, just prove that if I'm going to tackle this small town, I tackle it well in this small town. If I go to the state, I tackle it well in that state. Do markets that way.
Thank you. Thank you for that input, Nicole, because I guess it does give us some of the flavor in the tech space and what investors are looking for with, I guess, as always, a scarce and a limited pool of investable capital. And let me go to you, Afetsi, because you work in the world of energy and in the defense sector. And I guess when it comes to defense, we've probably made some progress as a continent in silencing the guns on our continent. And so I want us maybe to just hone in on the energy space, and which is a space that you certainly know quite a bit about. Talk to me about some of the opportunities that you see. And as part of this recovery, we know large parts of our continent continue to not have access to some of the things many of us take for granted on the energy side of things. But also, we are at a point where we're looking for ecologically sustainable energy alternatives that can allow for a just transition to a more, carbon-sensitive future. Where are some of the opportunities in that space for young entrepreneurs as part of recovery efforts on our continent?
Thank you. In terms of the energy space, there is a lot of opportunity for young entrepreneurs. If you look across the continent, you realize a lot of governments push and drive local participation, local content development. The challenge is not everybody thinks through their business plan or has a proper solution to the problem, like Nicole says. What I always tell people is take baby steps. Expansion is good, but before you do make a move, please ensure you are ready to scale. One good thing about COVID is it has presented an opportunity to restart. So even if you are in business, take pause, restart, relook at your model. First, seize the opportunity to establish, secure, and strengthen your business model, and clearly state what problem. I mean,
sorry, Afetsi, I lost.
Thanks to you.
I lost the tail end of your last sentence. So if you can maybe just say that last sentence again.
Apologies, Africa Internet. So I was saying that it is COVID-19 has presented an opportunity for businesses to sort of relook at their business model, to establish it, secure and strengthen it before they make a move into a new market or they make a move into a business. And clearly identify what problem you ask, like Nicholas. It's cool to move from.
We seem to be battling there with Afetsi, but I guess the main point of what Afetsi is suggesting is you got to, have all of your ducks in a row. You have to really make sure as an entrepreneur when you go into sectors that require extensive capital commitments, like the tech sector, like the energy sector, that you're really clear about what it is that you're bringing to the table and what the contours of that solution looks like. And just on that point, Afetsi, I'll allow you to complete the point you're making, but I also want, just in that regard, to also bring in somebody else who's in the energy sector, Simba, to maybe add, if he has any comments on some of the transitions that we need to make when it comes to energy. Please continue, Afetsi.
Yeah, so I'll just say that it's better to take baby steps and establish your business model before you do venture into a market or look for funding. And then one way to strengthen your business model is to establish partnerships. Don't try and go in fully on your own. It's always good to look to other players in the industry. Establish what your strengths are, what you have to present to the table, and form a partnership. It allows you access to market and to funding because everybody's bringing it.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Afetsi. Simba, let me bring you in here. I think Afetsi raises a lot of important points around the do's and don'ts when someone makes a foray or during the market entry phase. Talk to us about some of the opportunities you're seeing. I mean, I think across Southern Africa, a lot of restructuring and reorganization of our energy sector happening, and you playing, I guess, an active role every day in some of the shifts that are happening there. Let's talk about some of the opportunities and the space, if any, that those create for young people.
I think what I've noticed what's happening is that most people are now realizing that energy is a scarce commodity, and it's something that has to be secured for the future. So I think for young people getting into energy, understand where you sit in the value chain and how you contribute to the overall energy mix of the country. So in essence, where you sit in the value chain in terms of agriculture, farmers want to crop all throughout the year. But like in Zimbabwe, we have an issue with the energy, so they can't put their winter wheat under irrigation. So that's a potential value. That's a potential market that young energy entrepreneurs can look into. There's also the issue of off-grid solutions in rural areas, provided that the price is right. That is also a potential market that young entrepreneurs can look into. But in that case, you also, still in that speed, you also need to understand where you sit on the value chain and where exactly your energy is primarily targeted to. Is it for productive purposes or for consumptive purposes? Consumptive is usually difficult because it's usually hard to bank. But for productive for productive purposes, as in growth points, agriculture, where the revenue lines for your customer are clear, then you can go off grid.
Sure.
So, for example, I mean, if you look at me, we are assisting with the thermal project because we've realized that in Zimbabwe the hydro sources are not that many, and in order for us to connect a lot of renewables onto the grid, as in solar, we require base load. So, as much as it may be castigated as a dirty fuel, what we've tended to accept is that we have to look at one or two thermal projects, make them as clean as possible, and then balance out the energy mix. Also, I think as probably Afetsi also said, establish partnerships, establish value chains as well. So you may not necessarily be generating energy, but where are you sourcing your components from? Is there a particular entrepreneur in South Africa I can source my inverters, my panels from? Is there a skilled resource in Nigeria that can assist me with modeling my business plan financially? Is there a skilled resource in Rwanda that knows of a fund that he could pretty much direct to my business? So look at your business as an entire ecosystem. Identify where you sit in that ecosystem, and then create value opportunities for each other, especially in light of COVID, where a lot of things are no longer coming through because just to share travel. And now connectivity is now based online. There is no reason why some of these value chains cannot morph and say, look, I now don't have to have a value chain that sits in Zimbabwe only, but all across Africa. And then you can tap into the vast intellectual resources that the continent presents.
Okay, Simba, thank you very much for that. And I think an important point that you're raising there, which is for us to think and take a value chain approach, which can also see us unlocking industrialization opportunities in the manufacture, servicing and repair of some of the components that go into many of these massive capitally intense projects in the renewable space and in new areas of our energy mixes across the continent. Maybe before I go further, I mean, Simba, are you and Afetsi off the grid, or are you, I guess, speaking to us from the grid? I know, Simba, in Zim, that the grid is operated by ZESA, if I'm correct.
So I think you will always need the grid, to be well and truly honest. What we simply try and do is to minimize your reliance on the grid and take probably a third or half that power back into your control.
Sure.
So if you look at solar, there will be periods of extended cloud cover. There'll be periods of extended rain. That's when the grid comes in.
Sure.
So the grid will always be an integral part of the energy mix. Going off grid will not solve Africa's problems entirely.
All right.
But what you can do is make sure that you take those that can go off the grid, so that, for example, that is ZESA can direct its power to more intense, productive sectors like mining, like heavy manufacturing, light manufacturing, whilst the homes in essence go semi off the grid.
Okay. Anything you want to add there, Afetsi, just briefly before we take a look at the story of another entrepreneur from our continent?
Yeah, like Simba said, it's always best to have a combination of both. But what we do is we don't do production, we do supply chain management. So we supply the fuels needed to run all these heavy equipments, the power generators and so on, like your diesel fuel and heavy fuel oil and so on. And what we always advise our client is to always have a combination of both on the grid or mini grid support systems, so that you have sort of a backup or a buffer in case of a downtime. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that, Fetsi. Now, we had an opportunity to catch up with another young entrepreneur from our continent, Owen Muzambi. We spoke to him and caught up with him before the East Summit. And Owen is the a co-founder and director of Driven Advisory. It's a social enterprise working in the advisory and consulting space, focused on facilitating economic inclusion and development on our continent. Take a look at this.
Advice I would like to give to startups is one that I've also battled to at certain points in my life listen to as well, but I think it remains very relevant advice, and it comes from a saying that says you cannot discover what is in the oceans if you don't have the courage to lose sight of the shores. And what that means is sometimes you need to take that leap and take that risk. I see some of the benefits that we are getting right now in our company as a result of us losing sight of the shores and trying to discover new ways of working. And as we come into this very uncertain time of lockdown, we found ourselves reaping some rewards from risks that we took a couple of months pre-lockdown. So I guess in some instances, once you take the leap, the results might not be immediate, but surely will come your way at some point. And that's the advice.
Those are some remarks there from Owen Muzambi. He is the director and founder at Driven Advisory, which is an advisory platform working on economic inclusion and development on our continent, sharing some advice there on risk-taking and how you are able to, I guess, engender the agility that allows you to respond to a massive demand and supply side shock like COVID-19. And I think that's a perfect segue to my next question, to Mahmoud Johnson, who joins us from Liberia. And Mahmoud, you've certainly made the call for a new economic model. You would certainly find somebody who would agree with your view, and our president here in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's called for the same new economic model. And I'm quite interested, in light of the conversations we've had about preparing your projects for investment and making sure that you're able to respond to opportunity, how you see that as an interface between policy or regulation, the allocation of capital, and more importantly, what we value, measure, and reward.
Thank you very much. Well, here's the thing. We as young entrepreneurs for today, we who consider ourselves to be social entrepreneurs, often are tasked with solving some of the biggest challenges and biggest problems in our world and our countries. But when it comes, if you look at those problems, talk about unemployment, talk about poverty, there are serious structural reasons why those things are still persisting and have not been solved yet. And so when we are valuing these kinds of projects, we have to be able to value in not just the financials, but also the social impact that is also being created as well. That also has to have, some sort of cost or some sort of value price placed on, because if somebody, take for example, what I do, we work with smallholder farmers in very rural, very remote areas where there are no roads, where there's no electricity, there's no internet. So definitely the cost of operating that environment is going to be much higher than if I were to source all of my raw materials from some large plantation, right? And so when you're looking at my profits, it's not going to be as high as someone who set up a large farm in one area and does production there. But we are solving a social problem. We are reaching farmers in rural communities who would not be reached at all if we did not exist. We are putting money directly in the hands of these farmers who are now using this money to expand their enterprises. They are now being able to send their children to school. And all of those things provide some sort of social benefit that should be factored into these valuations that we're doing. And so when we talk about a new economic model, we have to broaden it from just looking at top line revenues versus what the costs are, and look at all the other benefits that these businesses and these enterprises are providing as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Mahmoud, that you frame it like that. And I guess implied in what you're suggesting is that how we allocate capital and how we measure the impact or the efficacy of that allocation currently doesn't do what you are suggesting, which is to take into account social measures or social metrics.
Exactly. I mean, we are starting to see impact investments and impact funds, but that's still not the mainstream. That's still not the mainstream. We know that we know that our general economic model across the continent right now, it just has not been able to create the kinds of jobs and the economic benefits that we wish to see. And we cannot relegate this mission to build a more equitable continent, a more prosperous continent, to just a few impact funds. This has to be the mainstream. It has to be something that's on the agenda of all the banks, all the VCs, the equity, the PE firms, and everybody else. Because I mean, this is the biggest problem that we have in our generation and in this century going forward. It's how do you make businesses more responsive to the needs of the people? It can't just be something that governments do or something that NGOs do. It has to be something that business is also a part of as well.
Fascinating insight there, Mahmoud, suggesting that our generational mission is to make sure that our economic activities have a sustainable impact and a responsible impact on our societies. And we'll certainly pick up on some of those threads, and I'd encourage my panelists to, in the interim, think about some of the issues at the level that Mahmoud is suggesting at a systemic level, because in the next few minutes or so, I'll certainly get some of your views on what are the 2 or 3 things, if you were in conversation with a policymaker, do you think could be catalytic from a regulation perspective, or even many of those who marshal large amounts of capital? What are some of the things that we could be doing to change how we act, how we measure what we act on, and more importantly, how we set the rules for the game? Now, we go into our second poll for the day, and our third poll. We've certainly had quite a few today, and we're now taking a look at who, in your view, just in light of the comment I've just made, potentially has the potential to make the largest systemic impact. And, this is not an either or, because I do think that we need some form of synergistic and integrated way of working between all of these different players. But in your view, who would you say has the greatest potential to transform the fortunes of our continent? Public sector, multinational corporations, local entrepreneurs, development assistance or foreign aid, NGOs or charities, and I guess we have a few NGOs here who might click on that one, and also then innovation hubs that incubate and accelerate many of the great ideas that we're talking about. And you might feel that there's another that we haven't added there in our list, and if so, you can then choose the last option, which is other. Let's certainly try and do a bit better than we did the last time, and if we can get at least 50 responses, I think that'll be a good showing. We're on 8 now. Let's see how many we can get. I'm certainly hoping that we can get those responses and have a few more. We've got about 10 or so now, and we'll come back to some of those issues. But let's see if we can't get some of those results coming through now. We've got about 11 in response, and we'll get some of the reactions from our panelists on what they make of the results as they come through. We've got about 14 people who've responded now to the poll. Let's cue some of the results there, if we have any at this point. Local entrepreneurs, 67%, and innovation hubs, 39%. Very few of you have any confidence, it seems, in the public sector and government. And I guess that's a concerning outcome. Multinational corporations as well, and not too much confidence in them, and nor in foreign direct investment. NGOs and charities, 5%. And it seems, as we try and get our responses up, probably halfway of the way there now, 23 responses, and our target 25 now. Our target is double that, around 50 or so. And still continuing to see that thread, just over 2/3 of the responses at just above 30, suggesting that local entrepreneurs have the greatest potential to transform the continent of Africa. 2/3 of the responses now at 35, suggesting that. Okay, need about 14 more responses to get to 50, which is our target. And the trend continues, just over 2/3 of you suggesting that it's local entrepreneurs, and seemingly very few having confidence in multinationals and foreign direct investment. I guess that speaks volumes about how Generation Z views what many in earlier generations would have thought is the panacea for much of our challenges, being a foreign direct investment and multinational corporation. So we're on 42 now, and overwhelmingly just shy of 75% or 3/4 there of the responses suggesting that local entrepreneurs really are and should be the driver of what we're looking for there. I'm quite interested in what my panelists make of this. And Nicole, let me start off with you. I mean, what do you make of these responses? You seem to be shaking your head there. And maybe what are you thinking? Is there some confirmation bias in the numbers?
I think it's definitely confirmation bias. Like I actually have I go on a rant all the time about how we cannot entrepreneur our way to development in Africa. Like vehemently, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I completely believe it has to be the government, because they literally have the ability to support or to kill your business. Yes. It doesn't even matter how much you entrepreneur and come up with all of these ideas. It absolutely has to be the government. Going back to what Mahmoud said, if we don't have a system of identification, if you don't have a power, infrastructure for you to be able to plug in, if you don't have network connectivity, you can't just come up with a new great idea. You're going to have to build a whole bunch of infrastructure. You can't be responsible for that. You can't build the roads. You can't build all the power. You can't do all of those things. In Nigeria, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago, talking about these ride-hailing companies. One of my portfolio companies worked with the government for 2 years to write the policy regulations to enable them to do, on-demand bikes. And then the government woke up one day and banned all motorcycles across the Lagos state. So imagine people are now.
So wait, Nicole, are all Okadas banned?
All the Okadas are banned they were banned in Lagos because they're saying, because of crime. And so we're like, wait, these people have raised over $20 million to build out all of this. They were paying all kinds of money for permits, etc. And the government woke up and said, no Okadas in these parts of Lagos state, after millions of dollars of entrepreneurial money, has gone into this and years of work. That's something the government can do. If we have another one of my portfolio companies, Helium Health, when they went to one of these states to help them, with their hospitals and digitizing records, they had to spend more money on helping them clean up the hospitals, put in power, solar systems, convince the MTN to put connectivity, teaching, bringing in computers, all of those things are infrastructure. This is the state government. And they realize that they cannot out-entrepreneur themselves there, right? If you want to talk about credit scoring algorithms, I have no national identification. The closest I have is a bank verification number, which only about 40% of the country has. Where's my identification? And then where's the government making policies to ensure that people are not predatory, that citizens' data is protected, all of those things. You can't out-entrepreneur your way through development in Africa.
Nicole, you make
my lovely panelists
make a fascinating point, and I think it makes for a very interesting counterpoint to a point made in an earlier webinar, which is that, at the end of the day, if we don't address chronic challenges in state capacity across our continent, and I think this is a challenge you find everywhere, across all 54 countries on our continent, then even some of the crowding in of private investment or entrepreneurial spirit is going to do very little to some of the systemic challenges that are the sole responsibility in some cases of the government. I mean, you think about education, you think about data protections and sovereignty that you speak of, Nicole. All of those are within the ambit of government. So certainly fascinating insights, and for some of our people who are following our conversation this morning, we'll have an opportunity in the next few minutes or so to take some of your questions. But before we do that, as I said to my panelists earlier on, I'm certainly hoping, and I know you are entrepreneurs, you're used to elevator pitches and all of that, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds, not even a minute, 30 seconds, to briefly tell us about two or three things that you feel could potentially unlock opportunity and impact at the scale necessary to deal with what Mahmoud earlier said is the generational challenge of young people on our continent, which is to make sure that we do business differently, but also in a way that is sustainable, inclusive, and impactful. Jeanette, I'm going to start off with you, and then we'll take Elizabeth's view thereafter. Jeanette, I think your microphone is on mute. So if you can just put your microphone on, and we'll take your response there. Jeanette, please go ahead.
Thanks. Is it on?
Yes, it's on, and you have 30 seconds.
Okay, like my advice for those, it's like merging can be the one of the best advice. Like if
we seem to be battling there with Jeanette's line as we try and get that better. Elizabeth, let me come to you, and we'll return to Jeanette once we can establish her on a more stable line. Jeanette? Sorry, Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Yes, so
and also to boost your business.
Hello?
Yes, Elizabeth, you can go ahead.
Personally, the three most important building blocks for entrepreneurs include innovation. Right now, we need a lot of creativity, especially in the agricultural spaces. So this is where we come in with hydroponic technology, where we can produce food in small spaces. And another important thing is collaboration. Our venture is collaborating with KCB Foundation to get financing, and also Miramar International College to get access to market. If we can foster in more collaboration in the sectors between NGOs, private sectors, and also governments, and especially also local entrepreneurs that we can reach another level. Okay. And lastly, the other important building block will be vision for social entrepreneurs.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Jeanette, let me come back to you. And I hope you heard the question. The question is, what are some of the three things that you feel could ensure that we're able to create the inclusive impact at the scale necessary to respond to the challenges and the role that young people can play in that regard?
I think what I think is that we can focus on education and like educating young entrepreneurs.
We seem to be battling.
Like in different areas, that would be the best way, like to.
Jeanette, are you still with us? Jeanette?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, I picked up the education part, but I want to hear the remainder of what you had to say.
I said, do you...
You might want to try and switch off your camera if you haven't done so already. It might, I guess, deal with the latency challenges and the concerns that we might be having with the
use
speed
the technology. That can be also
All right. Thank you so much, Jeanette, for that input. And we're battling with her connection there, but suggesting that technology and education are critical to that. Mahmoud, let me come to you. Your 2 or 3, and as I said, you have 30 seconds.
I think we need to completely overhaul the education system. We need to ensure that young people are learning relevant skills that are relevant to the local context and also relevant to where the country is going, what the vision is for the country. Second thing is, as Jenna was saying, technology and infrastructure, also as Nicole was saying, those are serious constraints that unfortunately we as entrepreneurs cannot fix in the short term. So we need public investment in technology and infrastructure. And third is we need a review of tax policy specifically, because there are so many ways that tax policy disadvantage small businesses. You have all of these once-off fees and fixed costs for importing things, for exporting things, for permits. All of those things are serious impediments that tip the scales against small businesses in favor of large corporations. So we need to review those policies and make sure that they are aligned with a vision for making it easier and simpler and less expensive for small businesses to thrive.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Afetsi, let me bring you in, and I guess the same question to you. You have 30 seconds.
Thanks. I would say access to data. We do, as entrepreneurs, one thing you really need to focus on in doing your research and building your business model before you go into a market is to have adequate data. Then I'll also look at infrastructure, which is key, and also tax incentives, which is one way that public sector and private sector can collaborate.
Sure.
Public sector has funding, they have the power, they have the regulatory on their side, so they can put in measures that will make entry easy for their locals. But what you realize is you find out they actually give these incentives to a lot of multinationals and foreign investors. So it makes business, and they come in with capital, so they don't need all these tax incentives. You should give it to your locals.
Sure.
You know, last year at the conference, I made a point that there's been too much focus on GDP versus GNP, when GNP actually trickles down. GDP is good on paper for IMF and World Bank, but it has nothing to do with the taxi driver or the student leaving college who wants to go into business. So what's the point? You know, I agree with Nicole's point about the poll. I was just surprised to see that public sector was low, but she's right. Public sector has the power and they need to drive the agenda. Awesome. But they need to do it in collaboration with private sector.
Perfect. Really like that input there and that point on GNP. Because I think we tend to speak a lot, as you say, about economic growth, but we don't talk about growing our productive base in many of our countries, because that's where the jobs are going to come from. That's where the skill and, more importantly, the industrial learning and upgrading is going to come from as well. Simba, your 3.
I think I probably have to echo what Nicole said. The first building block is an enabling environment created by the policyholders and the public sector. And then the second building blocks is channeling of resources into the productive sector, identifying in each country what are your key productive sector and channeling resources into those particular sectors. On the basis of those two, this is what will then create entrepreneurship, because quite frankly, not everybody can be an entrepreneur. But out of understanding, like in Zimbabwe, agriculture is the mainstay of our economy. We then begin to understand value addition industries in food, in pretty much in food, in tobacco, etc., etc. So my 3 are public sector, channeling resources and creating an enabling environment into the public sector, and then from there we can then grow the entrepreneurship ecosystems as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Simba. Nicole, it seems a few of the gentlemen on the call agree with some of your views on the role of the state. So I guess you have now the challenge of coming up with a new set of the 3, and you have 30 seconds as well for your elevator pitch.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's very simple thing. One is identification. We have arguments even in Nigeria. Do we have 180 million people, 200 million people? How do you track rural citizens? How do you track people all over? Identification, just even knowing how to count us. And then you can now figure out what we need, right? Identification is number one for that building block for data. I can't skip infrastructure because I talk about it, but I'm going to be more specific and say power.
Sure.
If I am running my office and I have to spend $2,000-$3,000 a month just on power alone, where am I? Like, that doesn't even make sense compared to my counterparts in other parts of the world. So I'm going to drill down and focus specifically just on power and it being affordable. So even if a place like Nigeria has, the third lowest power tariffs on the continent, but I only have power coming from the grid 20% of the time, I'm spending all this money on diesel, which is just also not good for the environment. So I'm going to limit it to those two. Give me identification so I truly know who people are, where they are, what they need, and then give me power.
Fascinating. Thank you so much to my panelists. And I also saw Uwimbabazi. I saw her sort of image quickly. So I don't know if she's still on the call with us. Would have loved to get some inputs from her. But if we don't have her on the call, I think we should now go into our Q&A. You've certainly been listening in patiently to our conversations this morning. And this is now the opportunity for you to get some of the questions you've posed and sent through to us to get responses from some of our panelists. And we're going to take a look at a maximum of 3 questions, time permitting, that have come through. Now, we have our questions on screen, and I want us maybe to start off with, Elizabeth, and just your brief response to Anonymous's question. And we're not going to take your answer now, but what I'll do, I'll allocate the questions so that when we've gone through who answers what, Elizabeth, I'll start off with you, and then Mahmoud, the next question is for you. About, I guess, allocating resources. And of course, given your own allocation to skincare, does that have an impact on food security? Interesting question there. And then I think, Simba, you spoke about value chains, and I want you maybe to take that question because a lot of your work has an impact on a very strong agricultural economy like the Zimbabwean one. And you might want to take the third question. And then I think the fourth question, I will then give to Nicole. If the time for Africa is now, can we go at it on our own? Or do we still need international support, which always comes with terms and conditions? I like that question because it certainly speaks about what many on our continent have called delinking and the possibilities in the current moment of doing that. Let's start, Elizabeth, with that first question there. Key dynamic growth markets in agriculture. How attractive are these to young people, and what measures can we put in place to benefit from these opportunities?
Yes, so in the agricultural sector, I think one of the most important things that most people fail to take heed of is identifying a specific need that we are going to serve in that across the value chain. So we have different kind of value chains that people can come into. So being more specific with the kind of problem that you'll be solving and now providing a particular solution to that particular problem, that is now the one way that young people can now come in with solutions where they can collaborate with different people or different sectors to make it happen. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that. Mahmoud, there's a question there for you. Are we prioritizing food security enough when I guess you can take some of your palm oil and put it into skin products?
Yes. And in fact, what we're doing is we are improving food security because here's the thing. For those who are not familiar with palm oil, you have 2 oils that come out of the palm tree. You have the palm oil that comes from the outer layer. That's what we eat in our food. And then on the inner layer, you have the palm kernel oil. What we use in our product is the palm kernel oil, which is most suited for skincare products. So by working with these farmers, we are providing access to machines that enable them to increase their productivity of palm oil in general, which they weren't achieving before. They were losing about 35% of the oils because they were using their hands to make the oils. Now they have access to a machine. Second point I'd like to make is my philosophy on this, on development work in general, is I don't think we should box solutions to say the pre-packaged solution. So we give you food, we give you certain oil, or we give you rice or whatever it is. What I think people need access to resources, because in my experience, people always know what the best solutions are for themselves and their families. What they need is access to the resources to go out and get those things done. So instead of giving you a particular thing in the form of maybe I give you books, or I give you shoes, or I give you rice, why not provide access to opportunities for people to earn their own money so that they can now go and make the investments in the communities that they need? Farmers need food, of course, but they also need to send their children to school. They also need to fix their roof when it's leaking. They need access to cash, right? So what we're trying to do is to create an environment where people can have access to markets, they can have access to tools to increase their productivity, so that they can now go and make those investments in their communities and in their children's futures in the way that they best see fit.
Okay. Thank you so much for that response there, Mahmoud. Let's cue the questions again so we can see the third and fourth question. And I see we've got new questions now. So, okay, Simba, key challenge in developing agricultural value chains, given the small size, and I think when the question refers to size, they're probably referring to markets in many of our African countries. How do we make sure that we regionalize our value chains? And it's also a theme we're going to be picking up in our discussion on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Simba?
I'll probably take a look at three things. If you look at small-scale farmers, I think it is the inability to pull together enough products or produce at scale to warrant it to be exported. Right. And then, of course, the movement, the ease of movement of goods between countries, transportation systems, permitting, license, which also speaks to regulatory environments. Secondly, the financing of these value chains as well. Issues to do with cross-border finance, matters to do with differences in exchange rate, differences in banking laws. So, for example, if I want to send products up to Nigeria, to Nicole, how easy is it for me to make payments to her? Can I produce the product in Zimbabwe dollars but accept the naira as payment? Right? How easy is it for me to transport those goods from Zimbabwe to Nigeria? Do I use road? Do I use rail? Do I use air? And is it commercially viable? Most of our farmers are small scale. So in that particular case, if I'm a farmer by myself, do I produce enough to warrant export?
Sure.
Or am I then not forced to sell to large local multinationals or large conglomerates that then have the ability to export? So I think those to me are the greatest challenges to
Simba, thank you very much.
Thank
you so much for that input.